Welcome back everyone. Continuing on with all of these 2021 reviews, we're going to be talking about none other than the iPad 3 and seeing how this thing holds up in 2021. Now, to be completely honest, I really don't think many people should be using the iPad 3 right now. It is kind of outdated, but there are still some surprising things about this device that really do shock me, to be completely honest. Now, I'll find the cheapest iPads that I would probably recommend this year, more so than the iPad 3, and I'll leave them linked down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time as always. Now, looking around the iPad 3 in terms of the body, the front of this device has that 9.7-inch IPS panel, and this in and of itself is probably one of the best things about this device. This and the camera setup. Now, the cameras are outdated, but I'll get into that in a second. But keep this in mind, this thing is almost a 9-year-old device. This thing came out in 2012, and the fact that it had a 9.7-inch panel with this type of resolution is seriously some really impressive stuff. So even beyond the software being outdated and all that other stuff, that in and of itself is a really cool thing about this device and something that I really do like. Now, it does have that home button, it does have a ton of bezel around the whole entire display, but again, I don't really think that's that much of a problem. I think it is kind of an annoyance, but it's really not that big of a deal. I think, we've been through a lot worse, and I think, it's not that big of a deal, especially when you consider the age of this device. Now, you do have that front-facing camera on this phone as well, and again, just another area where this tablet takes a W at, and the fact that this thing was able to do FaceTime calls and all that good stuff is seriously, again, some really cool stuff. Now, it does have that 30-pin connector on the bottom, that kind of older, iPhone charger. It has a headphone jack, which is great. And on the back, you have the aluminum back, which again is just another area where this iPad is just so beautiful at. And I think the overall body of this tablet is still super impressive. And when you feel this thing, when you mess with it, you're still going to feel like you have a really premium iPad. You're not going to feel like you have a super outdated device. You're not going to feel like any of that when you actually hold it in your hands. The main reason why this thing is outdated is because of the bezel on the front. Eventually, with the next generations of iPad, they did kind of slim down those bezels and all that stuff, but I still think for the time being, this is a really good iPad for the most part in terms of the body. But again, when you get into kind of the later part of this video, you'll understand why I probably won't recommend it. But since we're already talking about the body, we have to hit on the cameras. Now, this thing had a 5-megapixel camera on the back, and you could do 1080p videos on it, but not a whole lot after that. It's pretty much, archaic in a way, because I think it's like an iPhone 4 camera they put in this thing, and I think it's okay. I think a majority of people use this thing for like FaceTime calls and stuff, which again is totally okay. I totally understand it. It did have that front camera, which was like a VGA quality, so 480p. I think it was like 0.3 megapixels or something like that. Again, not a crazy high resolution, but respectable for the most part. And I think, as I stated before, when you get a device like this at that time, this was a groundbreaking achievement. I think the iPad 2 was probably the best improvement from one iPad to the other. This one was a slight improvement in some ways, but still, this was a really good iPad for the most part, and I'm actually glad that it did bring this type of capability at that time. So again, that in and of itself, the fact that this thing had cameras, both front and back cameras, is very impressive. A lot of tablets at that time didn't have front cameras, so I think that was kind of a groundbreaking thing as well. So again, that in and of itself gets a thumbs up for me in my books. Now, I think probably the number one reason why I would not recommend picking up an iPad 3 in 2021 would have to be the software. The software is pretty outdated. I mean, this thing stopped getting support at iOS 9.3.5, which I think is what the iPhone 4S stopped getting support at too. So this thing was pretty much like an iPhone 4S in so many ways. Now, when you get a device like this, you are pretty much outdated for the most part. You're really not getting any more software updates. I think you got a security update on this thing like in 2019, which was very impressive. I was not expecting this thing to get that. I think it was the iPhone 4S, maybe the iPad 3 got it too, but I mean, take it as you will, but you're really not going to be getting that great of a, software longevity from this device. It's already outdated. Believe it or not, a lot of these apps are also becoming outdated for these type of tablets. If you try to install some of the latest versions of some of these apps, you're not necessarily going to be able to download them, and that's kind of a huge problem. You don't want to get a tablet that's already outdated, that already can't download the latest versions of apps, let alone the full OS updates, the recent ones. So that's a pretty big deal. Typically with like a version of an iPad or something that's only like one version old, like if it's like just stopped at iOS 12 or 13, for the most part it's still okay. It's still going to be like fine for the most part. But when the apps stop getting supported, such as, TikTok, if you want to download TikTok or the latest version of Google Sheets or the latest version of your Safari browser, whatever the case is, you're not going to be getting a great experience because you're going to have to download an older version that's supported on that software. And I have videos talking about this too, but that is a pretty big deal. You have to keep that in mind. That is like the most important thing at the end of the day. So for sure, the software, the fact that it's already this outdated is just a humongous L in my opinion. I mean, it's the number one reason why I would not recommend picking up this iPad in 2021. However, on the flip side, there is a really good reason to pick up this iPad, and that is the size of this battery. I mean, this thing has a 11,560 milliamp hour battery inside of it. That is one of the biggest size batteries I think I've ever read out loud. It's a massive size battery. This thing is going to be able to last for an extremely long amount of time, and this thing wasn't even that thick. Like, it was a pretty slim device for the most part. So the fact that it had this big of a battery is super impressive, and this is probably the number one reason, the only reason for that matter, why I would recommend picking it up. This and the body, the fact that it had this big of a battery size and this type of form factor, again, just another W in my opinion. So in terms of that really pretty much covers it up for the most part in terms of the software standpoint and the battery standpoint. Now the performance standpoint, I'll pretty much just tell you the specs right now. It had that Apple A5X chip inside of it with 1GB of RAM. I think this was one of the first iPads to bring 1GB of RAM, which again is pretty impressive. Now the performance of this thing, again, is either gonna be great for you or it's not. I mean, in my opinion, it's not really that great of a performing iPad anymore, but I do appreciate what this iPad brought at that time. This thing, wasn't supposed to be the fastest thing of all time, I'm sure, anymore, but at that time, I'm sure it was pretty fast. A lot of people were still saying that, an iPad is just a bigger version of an iPhone, but this thing was extremely fast at that time. It did have that dual-core CPU inside of it too, which was great, and I think for a majority of tasks you're going to do with it, you're going to have a pretty okay experience, probably like 3-4 years ago, but in this day and age, it is pretty outdated. I think for the lot of tasks that you're going to do and a lot of, games and things and multitasking and all that stuff that you can do nowadays, you need something that can handle more, at least like 2GB of RAM, with like the iPad mini 4, with the iPad Air 2, those devices had that additional RAM inside of it, which makes it that much better of a device. And it's so crazy that the iPad Air 2 and mini 4 just came out like 2 years after this device, yet those things are still getting support. It's super crazy to me. So the performance standpoint, I would probably tell you I would probably recommend not picking up the iPad 3 just because of that in and of itself. But again, it's still not the end of the world, and I still think it has some capability for sure. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up in terms of the performance standpoint. Now, to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up an iPad 3 in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you, and it's probably not going to come to a surprise for anybody, but this is a pretty outdated device. It's really not going to be meaning a lot for a lot of people out there. It's going to have some capability for sure, but for a lot of tasks you're going to handle, it's just not going to be that great. However, there are still some really cool things about this iPad that still hold up in this day and age. You look at things like the screen, that panel is high resolution and it looks really good for the most part, and it looks really good for me as well. You have the front camera and the back camera, which is another huge asset for this type of device. On top of that, you have things like the big sized battery. I mean, that is a massive size battery for this thing. And when you have a battery like that size, you're going to be set. I mean, this thing can last for an extremely long amount of time. And as stated before, when you get a device in this type of specific, battery life, dude, you're going to be lasting for days and days on end. But the things that limit it are definitely the software. The software updates, the performance really isn't that great. And those are really the main things. The cameras I can get over, the bezel I can get over, the home button I can get over, but I just can't get over the performance and the software. Those are the two main reasons why I would not recommend picking up the iPad 3 in 2021. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.